I heard some strange rumor about my son, didn't believe it, but decided to watch him. The coffee in my hand had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept gripping the cup anyway, using it as an excuse to linger in the school parking lot. Other parents rushed past me, checking their phones, honking at slow-moving cars, living their busy lives. I should have been doing the same thing, rushing back to the garage to finish Mrs. Henderson's brake job, or maybe finally calling the insurance company about that fender bender from last month. Instead, I found myself frozen in place, replaying a conversation I'd overheard just moments earlier. "That Martinez kid," one mother had whispered to another as they walked past my truck. "Jenny saw him at the mall last weekend, flashing cash like he owned the place. Brand new iPhone, designer jacket. Where's a 15-year-old getting that kind of money?" The other woman had made some noncommittal sound, the kind people make when they want to seem interested but don't actually care. But I cared. Because the Martinez kid they were talking about was my son, Diego. My first instinct was to laugh it off. Diego? Flashing cash? The same kid who forgot to ask me for lunch money half the time and wore the same 3 hoodies in rotation because he claimed they were perfectly fine. The boy who still asked permission before downloading a free app on his phone? But as I sat there in that parking lot, staring at the spot where Diego would emerge from the building in about 10 minutes, little things started clicking together in my mind like puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring. Those brand new Air Jordans that appeared in our hallway last week. When I'd asked about them, Diego had mumbled something about trading with a friend, barely looking up from his homework. I'd been proud of his focus on studying, relieved that he wasn't like other teenagers who seemed obsessed with expensive things. Maybe I should have asked more questions. Then there were the late-night text notifications. I'd hear his phone buzzing from my bedroom next door, sometimes past midnight. When I'd mentioned it over breakfast, Diego had shrugged and said it was probably spam, or maybe kids from his study group comparing homework answers. The explanation seemed reasonable enough. Diego had always been responsible about his phone use, never one of those kids glued to social media or gaming apps. And his backpack. Hell, how had I not noticed his backpack? For the past month, maybe longer, that thing had been stuffed to the brim. When Diego dropped it by the front door each afternoon, it hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through our small apartment. I teased him about it once, asking if he was carrying rocks for a geology project. He'd laughed, a quick, nervous sound, and said something about extra textbooks for AP classes. I was a single father working 2 jobs. Diego was a straight-A student who never gave me trouble. When your kid is low-maintenance and high-achieving, you don't go looking for problems. You count your blessings and focus on keeping food on the table and the rent paid on time. But sitting in that truck, watching other parents collect their children, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not panic, not yet, but a creeping unease that made my hands shake slightly as I set down my coffee cup. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago. Since then, money had been tighter than ever. My ex-wife's support payments came sporadically, always with some excuse about her new job or unexpected expenses. I'd picked up extra shifts at the garage, and started doing weekend repair jobs for neighbors, but it still felt like we were always one emergency away from real trouble. Diego had noticed, of course. Kids always notice more than parents think they do. He'd stopped asking for things, new clothes, money for movies with friends, even small stuff like his favorite snacks from the grocery store. When his old sneakers developed a hole in the sole, he'd put duct tape over it and told me they were vintage now. He'd started doing his own laundry, making his own lunches, asking if he could help with anything around the house. I'd been touched by his maturity, grateful for a teenage son who understood that we all had to tighten our belts for a while. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who's so busy working and worrying that he doesn't notice when his child's problems might be bigger than homework stress. The school bell rang, and students began pouring out of the building. I spotted Diego immediately, tall for his age, dark hair that perpetually fell into his eyes, walking with that slightly hunched posture that teenagers perfect when they're trying to look casual. He was laughing at something his friend Marcus had said, looking completely normal. looking like my son. But as he got closer to my truck, I noticed his jacket. It was new, definitely new, some brand I didn't recognize but that looked expensive. The kind of jacket that cost more than I made in a week at the garage. Diego slid into the passenger seat and immediately started talking about his chemistry test, how he thought he'd aced the section on molecular bonding but wasn't sure about the last question. His voice was animated, excited, the way it always got when he talked about school. This was my son, the boy who genuinely enjoyed learning, who read science magazines for fun, who wanted to be an engineer someday and actually had the grades to make it happen. Nice jacket, I said casually, pulling out of the parking space. Thanks, his response was quick, automatic. Marcus let me borrow it. His mom buys him too much stuff. Another reasonable explanation. Marcus's family had money. His dad was a lawyer. His mom worked in real estate. It made sense that they'd have extra clothes lying around. But as we drove home, I found myself studying Diego in my peripheral vision. The way he kept checking his phone, typing quick responses with his thumbs. The way he seemed to be calculating something in his head, his lips moving slightly as he worked through numbers. The way he clutched his backpack against his chest like it contained something precious. How was your day, really? I asked, turning down the radio. Good. Normal. You know, school stuff. He looked out the window, watching familiar streets pass by. How were your shifts? You look tired. There it was again, that mature concern, that attempt to take care of me instead of letting me take care of him. When had our roles started reversing like this? I'm fine, son. Just the usual craziness at work. We rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, but my mind was anything but comfortable. Every rational part of me insisted that I was overreacting, that some gossipy parent had planted seeds of doubt that were now growing into full-blown paranoia. Diego was a good kid. Honor roll student. Never been in trouble, never given me a reason to worry. But as we pulled into our apartment complex, and Diego hefted that mysteriously heavy backpack over his shoulder, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I was going to start paying attention. Really paying attention. Because sometimes, the whispered rumors in school parking lots turn out to be more than just idle gossip. Sometimes, they're warnings. 3 days of watching had taught me that Diego's schedule was more predictable than a Swiss watch. School ended at 3:15. He'd walk out with Marcus and a few other kids, laugh about something for exactly 4 minutes, then wave goodbye and head toward the bus stop. The 3:35 bus would take him straight home, where he'd arrive by 4:10, drop that heavy backpack with its mysterious thud, and ask about my day while rifling through the fridge. Except today, Diego didn't head toward the bus stop. I was parked across the street from Jefferson High, engine running, feeling like the world's most pathetic private investigator. My hands were sweating against the steering wheel as I watched my son walk in the opposite direction of home, his stride confident and purposeful in a way I'd never seen before. He turned the corner onto Maple Street, and I had to make a split-second decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. I pulled into traffic and followed him, staying far enough back that he wouldn't notice my beat-up pickup in his peripheral vision, but close enough that I wouldn't lose him in the afternoon crowd. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the radio. This was insane. I was literally stalking my own child based on parking lot gossip and a few suspicious details. What kind of father does this? What kind of person follows their honor roll student son around like he's some sort of criminal? But then Diego stopped walking, and everything I thought I knew about my son shattered like glass. He was standing in the courtyard behind the old recreation center, the one that had been closed for budget cuts last year. The space was hidden from the main street, surrounded by chain-link fence and overgrown bushes that created a perfect pocket of privacy. And Diego wasn't alone. There were at least 15 kids there, maybe more, ranging in age from what looked like middle school up to high school seniors. They weren't hanging out or playing around. They were lined up, and they all had money in their hands. My son, my quiet, studious, responsible son, was standing at what could only be described as the center of operations. There was a folding table set up in front of him, covered with a black cloth like some sort of makeshift storefront. And the kids were approaching him one by one, like customers at a very organized, very illegal store. I watched in stunned silence as a girl who couldn't have been older than 13 handed Diego a $20 bill. He reached under the table, pulled out a small box, and handed it to her with the kind of smooth efficiency that spoke of practice. Lots of practice. Next was a boy around Diego's age, wearing a leather jacket that looked expensive. He handed over what appeared to be much more money, several bills folded together, and Diego reached into a different section under the table, retrieving a pair of pristine white sneakers still in their box. Then came the gadgets. Bluetooth earbuds still sealed in their packaging. A smartwatch that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Phone cases with designs I'd seen in those trendy stores at the mall, the ones where everything costs 3 times what it should. But it was the snacks that really threw me. Bags of chips, candy bars, energy drinks, all the stuff the school vending machine sold, except Diego was selling them for half the price. Kids were buying them in bulk, stuffing their backpacks with enough junk food to last a week. The whole operation was running like clockwork. Diego had everything organized, categorized, priced. He made change without hesitation, handled multiple customers efficiently, even had what looked like a waiting list for certain items. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment teenage scheme. This was a business. And the way he carried himself, that was what really knocked the breath out of me. Gone was the slightly awkward, humble boy who asked permission to download free apps. In his place stood someone who looked completely in control, almost cold, professional. The smile he gave his customers wasn't the genuine, warm expression I saw at home. It was calculated, charming in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. He was keeping a notebook, writing down transactions with the focus of an accountant. Between customers, he'd count money with quick, expert flicks of his fingers, then organize it into different stacks. When a younger kid approached without enough cash for what he wanted, Diego didn't just turn him away. He offered what looked like a payment plan, writing something down in a separate section of his notebook. Martinez runs a tight ship, I heard someone say, and I turned to see 2 older boys watching from nearby. They weren't customers. They were observers, studying Diego's operation with the kind of interest that made my stomach drop. Kid's got a real head for business. The other boy nodded. Shame he won't step up to bigger opportunities. Could make real money if he wasn't so careful all the time. Bigger opportunities. Real money. The words echoed in my head as I watched my 15-year-old son handle what had to be several $100s like it was pocket change. A car horn honked behind me, and I realized I'd been sitting in the same spot for almost 20 minutes. I drove around the block, parking where I could still see the courtyard but wouldn't attract attention. By the time I got back, Diego was packing up his operation, folding the table, organizing the remaining inventory into that perpetually heavy backpack. As he shouldered the bag and started walking toward the bus stop, toward his normal routine, toward home, toward asking me about my day like nothing had happened, I felt something break inside my chest. This wasn't my son. Or maybe it was, and I'd never really known him at all. For the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize, a spy in my own home, a detective investigating my own child. Every instinct told me to confront Diego immediately, to sit him down and demand explanations. But a deeper, more terrifying instinct whispered that I needed to understand the full scope of what I'd stumbled into before I made any moves. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Diego wasn't just selling snacks and sneakers anymore. During my 3rd surveillance mission, parked behind the abandoned recreation center like some sort of deranged stalker, I watched him hand a high school senior what was unmistakably a brand new laptop, still in its sealed box. The kid handed over a thick envelope in return, more money than I made in 2 weeks at the garage. But it was the handoff itself that made my hands shake against the steering wheel. Diego looked nervous for the first time since I'd started watching him. He kept glancing around, checking over his shoulder, and when the transaction was complete, he practically shoved the envelope into his backpack like it was radioactive. That's when I noticed them, the older boys from before, the ones who'd been observing Diego's operation. They weren't just watching anymore. They were involved. One of them, a tall kid with tattoos crawling up his neck, approached Diego after the laptop sale. I couldn't hear their conversation from my hiding spot, but I could read body language. The older boy was talking fast, gesturing with his hands, while Diego shook his head repeatedly. Whatever was being discussed, my son didn't want any part of it. Until the tattooed kid pulled out his phone and showed Diego something on the screen. Diego's entire posture changed. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and when he looked up again, there was something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. He nodded once, sharp and reluctant, and the older boy clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends. But friends don't make each other look like they want to throw up. That night at dinner, I studied Diego's face as he told me about his chemistry test, about the book he was reading for English class, about perfectly normal teenage things. He looked the same as always, my smart, responsible boy who helped clear the table without being asked and reminded me to take my vitamins. But now I could see the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly when he thought I wasn't looking, the forced quality to his usual easy smile. "You okay, son?" I asked, reaching across the table to touch his forehead. "You look tired. Just studying hard," he said, pulling away from my touch with a laugh that sounded almost normal. "Gotta keep those grades up for college applications, right?" College applications. The dreams we talked about since he was in middle school, engineering school, maybe MIT if his grades stayed perfect, a scholarship that would give him opportunities I'd never had. Was he risking all of that for whatever this was? My investigation escalated after I overheard a phone conversation that made my world tilt sideways. I'd come home early from my afternoon shift at the garage, planning to surprise Diego with his favorite takeout. His bedroom door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but I could hear him talking to someone, his voice low and urgent. "I told you I need more time," he was saying. "The payment's bigger than we discussed." Silence then. "I don't care what Tony said. That wasn't our deal." More silence. Diego's voice got tighter, more strained. "Look, I've been good for every payment so far, haven't I? I just need until Friday. I've got 3 more sales lined up, including that gaming system for the Morrison kid." My heart stopped. The Morrison kid lived in our building, a 12-year-old whose parents had just bought him a PlayStation for his birthday. "No, I'm not backing out," Diego continued. "I know what happens to people who back out. I just need you to trust me here." When the conversation ended, I heard him throw something against the wall, probably his phone, followed by a string of curse words I'd never heard him use before. That's when the pieces clicked together in the most horrible way possible. The older boys weren't just Diego's business partners. They were his suppliers. And suppliers don't work for free. Diego had gotten himself tangled up in something that was way bigger than selling snacks and sneakers to his classmates. He was fronting deals, taking products on credit, owing money to people who probably didn't accept "I need more time" as a valid excuse. The laptop, the gaming systems, the brand name items that cost more than I made in a month, Diego wasn't buying them. He was getting them from somewhere else, selling them, and keeping a cut. But if something went wrong, if a deal fell through or a customer couldn't pay, my 15-year-old son would be the one left holding the debt. And from what I'd overheard, something was definitely going wrong. I started noticing other things then, details that had been invisible before but now seemed to glow with neon urgency. The way Diego flinched when his phone buzzed with certain notifications. How he'd started eating dinner faster, like he needed to escape back to his room as quickly as possible. The fact that he'd stopped talking about his friends, stopped mentioning Marcus or anyone else from his normal social circle. My brilliant, responsible son was drowning in something that was spinning rapidly out of his control. And the sharks who'd gotten him into this mess were circling closer, ready to collect what they thought he owed them. I had to do something. But what do you do when your child's life might be in danger, and you're not even sure who the real enemy is? The text message came at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night that had started like any other. I was fixing a broken lamp in the living room, half watching some mindless TV show, when I heard Diego's phone buzz from his bedroom. Nothing unusual there, except for the sound that followed. A sharp intake of breath, then silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "Everything okay in there?" I called out. "Yeah, Dad. Just homework stuff." But his voice cracked on the word homework, and I knew with absolute certainty that my son was lying to me. An hour later, I heard his bedroom door creak open. I pretended to be asleep on the couch, watching through barely open eyes as Diego crept toward the front door, moving with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this before. He paused at the door, looking back toward my sleeping form, and I saw something in his face that made my chest tighten with panic. He looked terrified. The moment the door closed behind him, I was on my feet, grabbing my keys and jacket. Every paternal instinct I possessed was screaming that something was very, very wrong. Diego never left the house after dinner, never snuck out, never gave me a reason to worry about where he was or what he was doing. Until now. I followed his route from our apartment complex, staying far enough behind that he wouldn't notice my headlights but close enough that I wouldn't lose him in the maze of residential streets. He was walking fast, almost jogging, checking his phone every few steps like he was following GPS directions to somewhere he'd never been before. 20 minutes later, we reached a part of town I recognized but had no business being in after dark. The old industrial district, where half the street lights were broken and the other half flickered like dying fireflies. Empty lots filled with rusted equipment, abandoned warehouses with broken windows, and a general atmosphere of decay that made smart people drive quickly through with their doors locked. Diego stopped at a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The kind of place where you pay for your gas before pumping and hope your credit card information doesn't get stolen in the process. But he wasn't going inside. He was walking toward the narrow alley that ran alongside the building, disappearing into shadows so complete that I lost sight of him entirely. I parked across the street, hands shaking as I turned off my engine and rolled down my window. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional car door slamming from the 24-hour diner 2 blocks over. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to call the police, to get help, to do anything except sit alone in a truck watching my teenage son meet with God knows who in a dark alley. But I couldn't leave him. Whatever was happening, whatever danger he'd gotten himself into, I couldn't abandon him to face it alone. That's when I heard the voices. "You're 3 days late, Martinez." The voice was older, rougher, with an edge that made my blood freeze. 3 days. "Do you know what 3 days costs us?" I know. That was Diego, and he sounded younger than I'd ever heard him, like a little boy trying to convince adults that he hadn't broken something valuable. "I've got most of it. I just need until tomorrow to get the rest." "Most of it?" A different voice now, higher pitched but somehow more menacing. "Most of it doesn't pay the interest, kid. Most of it doesn't cover what you owe Tony for fronting you those laptops." "The laptops sold," Diego said, and I could hear him trying to inject confidence into his voice. "Both of them. But the Morrison kids' parents found out about the PlayStation deal and made him return it. I had to give them their money back. That's your problem, not ours." I crept closer to the alley, using parked cars as cover, until I could see the shadows of 3 figures pressed against the brick wall of the gas station. 2 larger shapes loomed over a smaller one that I knew with absolute certainty was my son. "Look," Diego was saying. "I've been good for every payment so far. I've moved more product for you guys than anyone else at Jefferson. I just hit a bad streak. It happens in business, right?" One of the larger figures stepped closer to Diego, and in the dim light from the gas station's security camera, I caught a glimpse of a face that looked like it had seen too much violence and enjoyed most of it. "This isn't business, kid. This is survival. And right now, you're not looking very likely to survive." The second figure grabbed Diego by the shoulders and slammed him against the brick wall with a sound that made me bite my tongue to keep from screaming. My son's head snapped back, and I saw him raise his hands in a gesture that was part surrender, part protection. Please, Diego said, and the raw fear in his voice nearly broke me. I can get the money. I have a plan. There's this kid at school whose parents just bought him a new car, and I know I can flip it for twice what they paid. Just give me until Monday. Monday? The first voice laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is a negotiation? You think you get to set the terms? They pressed closer, and Diego seemed to shrink against the wall. This was my brilliant, confident son who could charm his way through any situation, who had built a sophisticated business operation from nothing, who I'd watched handle difficult customers with the skill of someone twice his age. But right now, he looked like exactly what he was, a 15-year-old boy who had gotten himself into something far bigger and more dangerous than anything he could handle. That's when I saw the fear in his eyes, real and raw and desperate. The same fear I'd been carrying in my chest for weeks, except his was so much worse because he was living it, drowning in it, with no idea how to get back to the surface. My son wasn't just playing entrepreneur. He was standing in the middle of a shark tank, and those sharks had finally decided they were hungry. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at the coffee cup I'd filled and refilled a dozen times, watching the sun creep through our apartment windows and illuminate the ordinary life I thought we'd been living. Diego's textbooks stacked neatly on the counter. His honor roll certificate still taped to the refrigerator. A photo of us from last Christmas, both of us smiling like we didn't have a care in the world. When Diego finally emerged from his bedroom at 7:30, he looked like he'd slept about as well as I had. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair sticking up at odd angles, and there was a small cut on his cheek that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "Morning, Dad," he said, heading straight for the cereal cabinet like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't been threatened in a dark alley 12 hours earlier. Like our entire life wasn't built on lies I was only just beginning to understand. "Sit down." My voice came out harder than I'd intended, sharp enough to make Diego freeze with his hand on the cabinet door. He turned to look at me, and I saw him take in my appearance, the clothes I'd never changed out of, the exhaustion probably written across my face, the way my hands were shaking slightly against my coffee mug. "Dad? Are you okay? You look." I said, "Sit down, Diego." He moved to the kitchen table like he was walking to his execution, settling into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone who knew they were in trouble but wasn't sure how much trouble yet. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. This boy I'd raised, this son I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, looking at me with an expression that was part confusion, part fear, and part something else I couldn't identify. Resignation, maybe? Like he'd been waiting for this moment, and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "I followed you last night," I said quietly. The color drained from Diego's face so fast I thought he might pass out. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without any sound coming out. "I saw everything, son. The alley, those boys, what they did to you." My voice cracked on the last words, and I had to stop for a moment to compose myself. "I know about the business, the deals, all of it. So don't even think about lying to me anymore." Diego's hands were flat on the table, pressed down like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Since I heard Mrs. Patterson talking about you in the school parking lot." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "What did she say?" "That you were flashing cash around town. That a 15-year-old shouldn't have that kind of money." I leaned forward, trying to catch his eyes, but he was staring down at his hands. "Diego, look at me. Please." When he finally raised his head, I saw tears threatening to spill over, and something inside my chest cracked wide open. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he whispered. "I swear, Dad, I never meant for any of this to happen." "Then tell me how it did happen. Tell me everything, and don't leave out a single detail." The story that poured out of him over the next hour was simultaneously exactly what I'd expected and nothing like what I'd prepared myself to hear. It had started innocently enough, Diego selling his own lunch to kids who'd forgotten theirs, making $1 here and there. Then he noticed how much the school vending machines charged for snacks and realized he could buy the same stuff in bulk and sell it for half the price while still making a profit. I was good at it, he said, and for a moment there was a flash of the pride that had probably gotten him into this mess. Really good. I could read what people wanted, figure out what they'd pay for, make them feel like they were getting a deal even when I was making money. The business had grown quickly. Too quickly. Other kids started asking if he could get them things that weren't snacks, headphones, phone cases, eventually bigger items like sneakers and electronics. That's when Marcus introduced me to Tony and his crew. They said they could front me inventory, let me expand the operation. All I had to do was pay them back with interest when I sold everything. And you believed them? Diego's laugh was bitter, hollow. I thought I was smarter than them. I thought I could play their game and win because I understood business better than some high school dropouts. Son, I wasn't doing it for fun, Dad. I wasn't doing it because I wanted fancy things or to show off. His voice broke completely then, and the tears he'd been holding back finally spilled over. I was doing it for us. For you. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Do you think I don't notice? Do you think I don't see you counting change before we go grocery shopping, or the way you stare at bills before you open them? Do you think I don't know that Mom's checks don't come when they're supposed to, or that you're working double shifts just to keep us afloat? I reached across the table for his hand, but he pulled away. I thought if I could just make enough money, I could help. Take some pressure off you. Maybe save enough for college so you wouldn't have to worry about that either. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, looking younger than his 15 years. I thought I was helping, but I just made everything worse. And now I owe them $3,000, and if I don't pay by tomorrow... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I'd seen enough in that alley to understand exactly what would happen if Diego couldn't pay his debts. Why didn't you come to me? I whispered. Why didn't you tell me you were worried about money? Because you're my dad, he said simply. You're supposed to take care of me, not the other way around. But I thought if I could just fix it myself, you'd never have to know how bad things really were. Looking at my son across our kitchen table, my brilliant, misguided, terrified son who tried to save our family and nearly destroyed himself in the process, I realized that we'd both been carrying secrets, both trying to protect each other from truths we thought were too heavy to share. And now we had less than 24 hours to figure out how to save his life. I called in sick to both my jobs that Friday morning. For the first time in 8 months, someone else would have to handle the morning rush at the garage, and the weekend repair jobs would have to wait. My son was drowning, and I was the only lifeline he had. Dad, you can't get involved, Diego pleaded as I laced up my work boots with the grim determination of someone preparing for war. These aren't the kind of people you reason with. They're dangerous. More dangerous than a father protecting his child? I asked, grabbing my wallet and keys. I don't think so. The plan was simple in the way that only desperate plans can be. I was going to do something I'd sworn I'd never do again. Ask my ex-wife for help. 3 hours and the most humiliating phone call of my life later, I had a certified check for $3,000 burning a hole in my pocket, and a renewed understanding of why I'd divorced that woman in the first place. But pride was a luxury I couldn't afford when Diego's safety was on the line. Finding Tony and his crew wasn't hard. Diego had given me enough details, and a few carefully worded questions at the gas station led me to a house in the same rundown neighborhood where I'd witnessed the confrontation. The kind of place where broken dreams went to die, with peeling paint and windows covered by sheets instead of curtains. I knocked on the door at 2 p.m. sharp, my heart hammering but my resolve steady. When Tony answered, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19 but had eyes that looked 40, I didn't give him a chance to speak. I'm Diego Martinez's father, and we need to talk. What followed was the strangest, most terrifying conversation of my life. Tony invited me into a living room that reeked of cigarettes and failure, where 2 other boys sat on a couch that had seen better decades. These were the sharks who'd been circling my son, and up close, they looked like exactly what they were, kids playing at being criminals, dangerous not because they were evil masterminds but because they were stupid and desperate. Your boy owes us money, Tony said, settling into a chair like he was conducting a business meeting. $3,000 plus interest for being late. How much interest? I asked, pulling out the check. $500. I wrote him a check for $3,500, my hand steady despite the fact that I was handing over money I couldn't afford to lose. This covers everything Diego owes you, plus interest, plus a little extra to make sure you never contact my son again. Tony stared at the check like he'd never seen that much money in one place. Man, your kid was good for business. Smart, reliable, brought in more customers than was. I interrupted. Past tense. Diego's done with this business, and if any of you so much as look at him wrong, I'll make sure every parent at Jefferson High knows exactly who's been selling their children stolen merchandise. The threat hung in the air between us. These boys made their money by staying invisible, by operating in shadows where parents and teachers couldn't see them. The last thing they wanted was attention from adults who could make their lives very complicated. We got other kids who can move product, one of the boys on the couch said, but he didn't sound convincing. Then go find them, I said, standing up. But leave mine alone. I walked out of that house with my legs shaking and my heart racing, but I'd done what I came to do. Diego was free, even if freedom had cost us money we couldn't afford to lose. When I got home, I found Diego exactly where I'd left him, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. It's done, I said simply. He looked up at me with an expression of relief so profound it almost brought me to tears. How much? More than we had. Less than losing you would have cost me. That evening, as we sat together on our couch sharing takeout from the Chinese place Diego loved, I watched my son really smile for the first time in weeks. The weight that had been crushing him was gone, but I could see he was still processing everything that had happened. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it. For lying for the money, for putting you in danger. I know you are. But Diego, listen to me, that brain of yours, that ability to see opportunities and make things happen. That's not a flaw. That's a gift. The problem wasn't that you were too smart, it was that you were too isolated. He looked confused. What do you mean? You tried to solve our family's problems all by yourself. You saw me struggling and decided it was your job to fix it. But that's not how families work, son. We're supposed to struggle together, solve problems together, support each other when things get hard. But I wanted to help. And you will help. Your intelligence, your drive, your ability to understand how things work, those qualities are going to take you places I can't even imagine. But next time you want to save the world, or just save your old man, talk to me first. Because the same fire that makes you extraordinary can burn you alive if you're trying to tend it all by yourself. 6 months later, Diego was accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. His essay about learning the difference between entrepreneurship and desperation apparently made quite an impression on the admissions committee. But the real lesson wasn't about college or careers or even about the dangers of getting involved with the wrong crowd. It was about trust and family, and the difference between helping someone and trying to rescue them from problems you're too young to understand. Sometimes the most brilliant people make the most spectacular mistakes, not because they're not smart enough to see the danger, but because they're too smart to ask for help. And sometimes, the only way to save someone you love is to step into the darkness with them and help them find their way back to the light. As fathers, we want to protect our children from every possible harm. But maybe the most important protection we can offer isn't shielding them from the world's dangers. It's making sure they never feel so alone that they think facing those dangers by themselves is their only option. Diego learned that intelligence without wisdom can be dangerous, that good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes, and that the people who love you are there to help carry the weight when it gets too heavy for one person to bear. And I learned that sometimes the rumors whispered in school parking lots aren't just gossip. They're a father's last chance to save his son from drowning in waters too deep for a 15-year-old to navigate alone.